Thank you to everybody that sent me interesting facts when I requested them. I want to learn some weird stuff. No, I don't want to say that, actually. It really meant a lot to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading all of them. And I noticed that 3 of them managed to fit into a common theme together, and that's what this video is all about. Dangerous sounding facts about ordinary foods. And now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to fearmonger or anything. These foods aren't actually dangerous, and I'm not trying to say that you should stop eating them. The first thing that I wanted to do, of course, was fact check all 3 of these, and it turns out that yes, bananas are in fact slightly radioactive, and we're going to talk about how radioactive and what that means in a little bit. Tomatoes do contain nicotine, and then the question becomes, can you get addicted to tomatoes? I might already be addicted. I put them in a lot. And apple seeds. I want to make a tiny little correction with this one, but it's really just me being picky about wording because this fact is disturbingly spot on. And we're going to start there. Let's go. So apple seeds don't directly contain cyanide, and so that's a relief, right? What they do contain, though, is something called amygdalin, and you don't need to know what amygdalin is, you just need to know what your body does with it. And the unfortunate thing is that when amygdalin enters your body has a tendency to process it into cyanide, and that's where the problem lies. And if you don't know what cyanide is, a healthy starting point is to realize that cyanide in real life does not go hand in hand with happiness. To use a technical term, it is very bad for you. So yeah, apple seeds don't have cyanide in them, they just have something that turns into cyanide almost immediately upon entering your body. Now, to be clear, eating apples is not dangerous. You should not just stop eating apples because some guy on the internet talked about amygdalin. Let's break down the risk for real. For starters, amygdalin lives almost exclusively in the apple seed, and most people aren't out there eating the entire apple. I don't think that eating apple cores is a particularly common practice. You're unlikely to eat an apple seed in the first place, and if you do, you're most likely to swallow it whole, and that's good. Chewing the seed is bad. See, an intact apple seed keeps all of the poison neatly tucked inside, and your body doesn't have to prove that it can fight some of it off, which it can. That's the other good news. Your body can detoxify small amounts of cyanide, but at a certain point, the cyanide starts to win. Let's say you do eat an entire apple and you chew your way right through the core, finally grinding up the apple seeds inside of it. The good news is that a typical apple has somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 seeds in it, and it's going to take a lot more than that to generate a lethal dose of amygdalin. But worst case scenarios are more fun to talk about, so let's say that you don't know about the dangers of amygdalin. Let's say that you got your hands on a bag of apple seeds, and for our final hypothetical, let's say that you thought that was going to be a really tasty snack. It might be your last. That estimate of 200 seeds put forth by 2 lone soldiers is actually a solid estimate. It's gonna vary a lot person to person based off size and other factors, but most people would probably at the very least get incredibly sick from chewing up 200 apple seeds. And like 200 seems oddly low, doesn't it? Like that's unsettling to me. So an apple a day might keep the doctor away, but 200 crushed up apple seeds could keep just about anyone away, maybe permanently. Anyway, let's talk about something else that's completely bananas. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the word radioactive, the next word that comes to mind is something like waste or decay or shrimp now, apparently, because why the heck not? But what really imagines my dragons is that the combination of words radioactive bananas is not actually a crazy thing to say. Bananas get their radioactivity from potassium. Okay, you've probably heard that bananas are high in potassium, and it just so happens that a small percentage of all potassium is naturally radioactive. And this is actually true of a lot of things other than potassium, but let's stick to the potassium in bananas for now. What does it actually mean for something to be radioactive? Radioactivity is honestly way too complicated to cover properly in this video, so you're just gonna have to settle for the silly version that I've got in store for you. And again, we're gonna keep using potassium as an example. Like people, some atoms are just unstable and have a tendency to break down over time, and these unstable atoms are called radioactive isotopes. In the case of potassium, you end up with a radioactive isotope when a potassium atom ends up with 40 pieces of stuff in its middle parts, but potassium is much more comfortable having 39 pieces of stuff instead, and so that's where the instability comes from. You might think that it would just get rid of one of its pieces of stuff, but that's not interesting enough for a radioactive isotope like potassium-40. Instead, what it does is it plays some sleight of hand on the 40 pieces of stuff it has, and it changes it into a slightly different configuration of 40 pieces of stuff. And by doing this, the potassium has actually changed into something else, usually calcium, sometimes a special variant of argon, both comfortable having 40 pieces of stuff, and occasionally it does some other stuff we're not even going to talk about. So the potassium has changed from an unstable thing into a stable thing. And here's where it gets incredibly weird. In this transition from unstable to stable, it has actually lost a little bit of mass. Some of it seems to have just disappeared, which doesn't make much sense. Where did it go? It turns out, stay with me, some of the mass, some of the physical stuff has turned into pure energy, which sounds just like the kind of thing that science would never back up, but get this. This kind of thing, the transition of physical mass into pure energy, is exactly what is being described by the single most famous equation in the history of science, possibly in the history of equations. That's right. E equals mc squared, an equation that paints energy and mass as two sides of the same coin. Anyway, all of this is basically to say that radioactive decay releases energy, and the energy that is being released comes in the form of radiation. Radiation is kind of all around us all the time, but in high doses it can be incredibly dangerous. And when measuring radiation and the effect on the body, a useful unit of measurement is something called a sievert. Generally speaking, it's accepted that roughly 10 sieverts is going to be a lethal dose for just about anybody. And so now, how many sieverts worth of radiation come from eating a banana? This is going to vary quite a bit on a case-by-case basis, but a generally good estimate is that one banana is going to deliver about 0.1 microsieverts of radiation to your body. So it would take something like 100 million bananas to have enough radiation for the radiation itself to kill you, but let me assure you, 100 million bananas is going to cause much worse problems before the radiation gets you. So let's compare it to something a little bit more reasonable. Say something like a typical chest x-ray is going to deliver somewhere in the range of 0.1 millisieverts. And so in banana equivalents, this is about 1,000 bananas worth of radiation. And to me, that actually seems kind of surprisingly low, that 1,000 bananas equals roughly one chest x-ray. Now, chest x-rays are generally pretty safe, even though the technician runs into a different room to push the button. And I'm realizing now while recording that I didn't come up with a segue into the next section, so like, I don't know, it's tomato time! So tomatoes have nicotine in them, and that means that eating tomatoes is exactly like smoking cigarettes. But how many tomatoes would it take to get the same nicotine bump as one cigarette? Well, I actually found that of the 3 facts covered in this video, this one was the hardest to nail down numerically, so we're gonna have to lean pretty hard on some best guesses. And as far as I can tell, I think it's fairly safe to assume that eating one tomato could deliver around 1 microgram of nicotine into your body, whereas a typical cigarette could contain as much as 28 milligrams, which is a lot more. But during the smoking process, most of the nicotine is lost and not absorbed into the body. And a pretty safe guess is that one cigarette would introduce your body to around 2 milligrams of nicotine by the end of it. And so that gives us a conversion ratio of 2,000 tomatoes to 1 cigarette, or about 45 eggplants. What? Eggplants actually have the second highest nicotine content of any naturally occurring thing, behind tobacco. And now, tobacco has a distant lead, but still, eggplants are second. And this leads to a really interesting point, that tobacco, eggplants, and tomatoes are actually a lot more closely related than I would have thought before starting researching for this video, along with potatoes, peppers, and a bunch of other things. They all make up something called the nightshade family, which sounds way too cool to be the name of a category involving potatoes. I'm sorry, potatoes. Not all nightshades contain nicotine, but the ones that I've listed so far do, and it's believed to have evolved in there as something of a naturally occurring pesticide, which brings us full circle back to, is nicotine dangerous? If you were to list out all of the things inside of a cigarette, you would probably find that nicotine is one of the least harmful things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it is good for you, it just means that everything else in the cigarette is that bad for you. But here's the interesting part. Nicotine is what puts the addiction in smoking addiction. It's what keeps people coming back for more cigarettes and introducing their bodies to more and more and more of the really, really, really terrible stuff in there. So the nicotine isn't directly harmful in a cigarette, but it is the reason that people keep going back for more. So what does all of this mean in the context of tomatoes? Kinda nothing, really. Honestly, the worst thing that the nicotine in a tomato could do to you is potentially get you somewhat addicted to eating tomatoes, but you're going to need to eat tomatoes by the truckload in order to get addicted. And I think that if you are willing to order and eat an entire truckload of tomatoes in the first place, you don't need nicotine's help getting addicted. You are already there. Anyway, that is all that I had for this video. Thank you so very much to the 3 fine folks whose comments I used to make this video, and to anyone who has been brave enough to watch all the way to the end. Thank you so very much for doing so, and I hope you have a wonderful day.